I think almost everyone will know everyone on the panel, but I will be clear and careful. So Sora Pandey, Alan McDonald, Bridget Scanlon, Jared Van Ruin, and on my side here, Camille Bouchez, Jack Sharp, and Rui Ma. So we have designed a panel that really we've tried to make sure we're diverse. We have different career stages, different countries, geographies, to make sure that we're mixing it up. Some academic representation, industry representation, and so forth. I would like to start by just saying a couple words, just a minute or two to set the scene for this morning's panel, and then we'll go straight into some questions. You'll see here the QR code. Feel free to scan that and send in questions or comments. I'll keep looking at my screen here to intermix some of the questions from you guys in the audience as we go. So I started to think about this a while ago when I was working on it with the panel, and we thought, does groundwater research really face a crossroads? That was the question we were thinking about, and some of you may have seen papers published over 20 years ago. Ibaraki and Schwartz, 2001, questioned if we're nearing the end of impactful hydrogeological research. That was in 2001, and in 2002, Miller and Gray came back with what was essentially a bit of a reply paper, and they forecasted a very bright future for hydrogeological research with many unresolved issues. And in fact, they cited about 12 unresolved issues in that paper. Fundamental models, scale issues, stochastic subsurface systems, fractured systems, subsurface characterization, non-aqueous phase liquid contamination, biochemical transformations, robust numerical simulators, complex systems modeling, inverse solution methods, model predictability, management and optimization. You may have also seen in 2005 Hydrogeology Journal's special edition on the future of hydrogeology, and there were 30 papers published in 2005 that did really provide a prognosis on the future of hydrogeology. What is interesting in those papers is that all 30 papers by all 30 groups of authors suggested a very positive outlook for all of those disciplines in that special issue. So the question that we're here to ask this morning is, where do we stand as a hydrogeologic research community and as practitioners, as professionals, as industrial experts, some 20 years after those crystal ball gazing papers? And I think it is timely and important that we are asking some pretty tough questions that we want to tackle this morning. Are we overestimating our field's vitality from a research perspective? Is our research in the year 2024 truly groundbreaking, or are we becoming more applied? And perhaps both of those are equally valid and equally valuable. What research is actually needed today and over coming decades? And how do we define both interesting and important research? And what's the real impact of our research work, and how do we actually measure impact? It's a question that governments and universities and sectors at large are asking. And if our work isn't well cited or cited at all, or not useful to or used by industry or government, then what? I think we do have to ask those questions, and we do know from citation data that many papers do fall into that category of low citations and possibly not used by industry or government. I do offer a note of caution here that even highly cited papers don't guarantee influence or impact, because we know that there are things that are now coined rhetorical citations. There's a paper in Science a couple years ago on that showed that rhetorical citations dominate most papers, and unlike what are called substantive citations, do not meaningfully impact or influence research. And we also know that there are things called sleeping beauties, Research that lies dormant and remains unsighted for decades, only to awaken and become cited years and years after publication, though I think sleeping beauties are pretty rare in hydrogeology, but I'm happy to have that discussion. It was interesting that this year in June, a paper in Water Resources Research by Mao et al. Studied 310,000 studies in hydrology globally between 1980 and 2023. If you haven't seen that paper, it was published in June 24, just a couple months ago in WRR, and what it showed was a major shift in research foci from groundwater in the early 80s and 90s now to climate change and eco-hydrology. And if you look at the word clouds in that paper, groundwater was big in the word cloud in the 1980 to 1990 period, but barely visible in the latest decade. You need to look really carefully to see it. And so this signals a potential decline in interest over recent decades. And I'm again here to discuss that. So what is going on? There's different views, there's a contention here. Do we need more groundwater research? What are the key challenges? What are the key opportunities? How will hydrogeological research evolve over the next 50 years? And that is what we're here to discuss today. So I'm going to kick off with a very simple question for our panel. And we don't want to spend a lot of time on this question, colleagues, but I thought we would do a quick temperature check across the panel, a simple yes or no, and a little brief remark maybe just to get us going. So my first one's a simple one. Do you think that all of the necessary groundwater research that we need has been done? I'm going to start with you, Saurabh.
Thank you, Craig.
What do you
Good morning,
think?
everyone. I don't think so. We haven't done all the research, but I think we are forgetting a lot of the original things in hydrogeology, which we should continue talking about, but we are not talking about the old analytical solutions or old methods that had been done previously. So
different things to do.
And also sometimes a lot of research is out there, but it's hidden because it's a little quiet. It's not very loud.
Not very loud. Good comment. Thank you. And Alan, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, definitely there's a lot more research to be done. And I think the more sensors we have, the more we can look at the Earth, the more we realize we don't really understand a lot of our processes. So the more we can see things, the more we can see we need to understand more how groundwater works. And I think just as our systems get more perturbed and out of balance, again, we need to understand these processes much better. When things are moving beyond a steady state to really unstable conditions, we need to understand these processes. So an awful lot more research to be done.
Fantastic. And Bridget, any thoughts?
I guess the Monty Python,
I'm not sure if you're coming.
Monty Python thing, I'm not dead yet, you know, we're not dead yet, comes to mind. I think there's so much to do, and because there's so much emphasis on climate change and other topics and global topics, that it's difficult to get space for hydrogeology, but we certainly need it, and we need to bring more geology back into hydrogeology and understand the subsurface. I mean, when you see talks by people about sub-Saharan Africa, and they're still relying on old maps from the 50s and 60s, you know, and there's opportunities to do more geophysics. So I think we need to continue to do more. There's certainly need, but academia is oftentimes on sort of hype type things rather than real stuff.
Fantastic, Bridget. And Jared, you're just starting a postdoc. What do you think?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's an emphatic no. We're not done.
Emphatic.
Yeah. I think it's a human condition that we're limited mostly by our perspectives, right? And as we develop new innovative techniques, so our perspectives open. And so we have the chance to innovate and find out new stuff. So if you think it's done, then you're probably looking in the wrong place.
Right. Yeah, okay. And Camille, are you in agreement? There's complete agreement so far.
Yeah.
Are we biased, colleagues? Let's keep going. Yeah.
We might be biased. I will agree as well. Of course, I think that there are still some great challenges and opportunities for groundwater research. I think that, first of all, because the system itself is changing, it means that everything that we've done, maybe we need to do it again anyway. And there's, I think, a huge place for a better integration of groundwater into the understanding of climate change, of the critical zone, of all those fluxes in the earth. And I think there, groundwater play really a crucial role, that there's still a lot to investigate. So definitely, there is still research to do.
Fantastic. And Jack, you won the Mainzer in the 1970s, so you've been doing this for about 50 years.
So I guess I'm here for the long-term perspective. But the answer is no, the research is not done. If you look at it historically, there's many times when we thought, oh, we've answered all the key questions. If you went to the USGS Water Resources Division in 1965, they said, we've solved all the well hydraulics problems, you know where the aquifers are, everything else is just cleanup. We never even heard of dispersion. We never heard of transport. We never heard of flow and fractured rock. So, and I think and we know what the key issues are today, but I think predicting what we're going to be doing in 10 years or 20 years is extremely difficult. But we'll be doing something and it'll be fun.
Thanks, Jack. And Rui?
I agree with those opinions. Necessarily, groundwater research has not been definitely done. And I have listened to the talks in these days. I found many traditional hydrogeological studies at local and regional studies. And also, I see many emerging area of groundwater research, and a lot of issues related to groundwater has not been solved. These issues may include the urban hydrogeology, and this caused by the city infrastructures, and the interplay between groundwater and the ecosystem, and also the new groundwater contaminant problem caused by PFAS and microplastics, and all these people talks about these issues, and the coupled flow heat and solid transport in colder regions, which we are not very done for this research, and the impact of climate change and human activities on groundwater recharge, storage, and discharge. And we also unsolved the problem, the sustainable groundwater management. How do we manage the groundwater? And all these kind of things, we need the new research with our new techniques and multidisciplinary knowledge, and also very coupled physical and chemical process to address all these issues. So we definitely need a lot of groundwater research to go.
All right, so you've heard the initial words from the panel. 100% agreement that there is a strong research future for hydrogeology. So we are trying to get some constructive disruption in the panel, and we're going to dive a little bit further, and hopefully some of you in the audience will have similar and or different views. So feel free to share those with us in the chat room there in Mentimeter. I think we do need to get a bit more specific. So now that we've said, yeah, there is all this research to be done, I think the panel is generally supporting the consensus of the 30 papers in HJ in 2005, all positive prognoses, also Cass Miller's paper in 2002, all these vibrant research areas. My next question gets a little bit more detailed, and I want to know from panel members what the 2 to 3 game-changing research, not incremental, there's lots of incremental research. What are the 2 to 3 game-changing research areas for hydrogeology, the game changers? And so to make that real, if I was to offer you as a granting agency, say, you can choose a number, but I'm going to pick $10 million. That could be US dollars, it's a large number, but I give you $10 million, what would you prioritize for research? So, and I think that will help shape that and make it real. But Camille, what would you do? You're starting a research career. I've just given you $10 million. You've now got to do something with it. Needs to be sexy research.
Well, thank you, Craig, first.
For the money.
For the money, of course. Yeah, well, I think data really is the key, and I think that I would definitely invest in trying to develop these places and which we call observatories, where we can really try to monitor and measure a lot of different variables. And I think that we often miss money for these kind of sites, while I think if we can measure at the same time with a high frequency a lot of different variables all together, then that's an ideal place if we want to test some hypotheses with our models or even if with our concepts. And so I would definitely try to highly monitor some place, and also probably biased because that's what I'm doing, but I mean, I think there is still a lot to do to try to develop new tracers to even better understand all these fluxes in the groundwater, in interactions with the surface water, with vegetation. And I would say, for instance, if we look a little bit back, what stable isotopes have been doing for groundwater, I think is a great example of something that has been developed, that has been really widespread, and now I think we have a really better understanding of those fluxes thanks to this kind of development. So I would definitely push towards a better new tracers, new natural tracers, and more data on some specific sites to really have a place where we can really, you know, question our knowledge about groundwater.
So, and perhaps just to take that further, there's been a lot of discussion about increased data resolution, and in particular, I think, a focus on spatial data. What about temporal?
Yeah, I definitely think that we need much more temporal data, meaning that we need to have some time series, and of course I'm talking about like tracers, but with geophysics as well, for instance, we can do those repeated campaigns that really provide an understanding of how the system is changing. And also something that I found interesting is that we can also look at tracers that actually give us an idea of the past that we can also integrate to better understand, because I mean, the groundwater today is also inherited from everything that happened before, and we can also look back at this history of groundwater to better understand the state where we are today. So yeah, I think the temporal scale really is something that we need to investigate, and there's still a lot to do, because we have now innovative techniques that we can use to, you know, for instance, have in situ high frequency measurement of how the subsurface is respiring, oxygen dynamic, this kind of thing, which I think is really new and brings some new understanding of groundwater, but how that is connected with other compartments.
Great, thank you, Camille. Jack, any thoughts on this one?
For me, this is the easiest question. I would find 500 or 1,000 young hydrogeologists and say, do something interesting. Because I think the new ideas are going to come from the young people that are just getting started, and I think that would be a tremendously a fertile way to distribute that money. So I'd give the young people in here money. Do something you find interesting.
All right, so Jack's given his $10 million out to the young people in the room. Great, thanks, Jack. Oh, round of applause from a number of colleagues. There you go. And Rui, any thoughts from you on this question? $10 million.
Yeah, for me, it depends on the purpose of the research and the existing studies of the study area. If there are no or very few hydrogeological data, I will definitely agree with Camille, and the priority of the work will go to the site characterization, such as drilling, geophysics, geochemical, and isotope sampling and measurements, and we collect a lot of data. And if there are already data there, the first job should be to build the conceptual model and a numerical model to integrate all this data and find the way and the interesting new finding to go deeper. I think that's what I will do.
So an emphasis on data acquisition is coming through clearly, and Jack's donating his money to young people. Excellent. Jared, you're probably getting some of the money that Jack's just given out, as well as the 10 million.
Yeah, let's hope. I mean, I think it's still a matter of perspective, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some researchers now in large research institutions that would look at $10 million and say it's quite a small budget. And then if I go back home, there's half a subcontinent that would do a lot with this, right? And I think when we move into this uncertain space, and I'd like to echo what Cami and the other panelists have said, being able to track a changing environment costs a lot of money, but the human resource is actually what's the most valuable, right? And I also like to look back into the past and echo what Sorab said. And I think some of the most valuable ideas are behind us, and we've neglected them. So there's ancestral knowledge, there's indigenous knowledge in these places that we don't understand, that we can really tap into. So I think if you want to spend this kind of money, and you want to truly have groundbreaking research, you need to find this excitement that's bubbling under the surface in the developing countries, where innovation is necessary, right? Where they need it to develop into the developing world. And I think this is really where this money can be spent properly.
Good. And I can see Sorab's just waiting to just jump in.
Me there, you know. I agree. Spatially and temporally continuous data is what we need, but we shouldn't forget our fundamentals. I think people have managed their water supply way before there were computers, way before there were models. There were fundamental ways that they did that, and we are forgetting that. And that's my take on $10 million.
So what were you going to do with the $10 million then?
Go on a vacation. No. Again, spatially and temporally continuous data is what I think we need to be focusing on.
Yeah. Good. All right, because we will be in order on the spending of the 10 million. Yeah. Alan, thoughts?
Well, Bridget talked about Monty Python. I thought I would get you Monty Python and raise it and get some words from Jesus about the parable of the talents. Does anyone remember that from Sunday school? And that was encouraging people not to bury talents in the ground, but to get them out and to use them and to spread them widely. So I probably wouldn't bury it in the ground in some big infrastructure thing. I think I would try and repeat a brilliant project, was really innovative, which was $10 million, and it was called the UpGrow project. And what was great about that is it was problem-focused. It said, hey, how do we unlock the potential for groundwater in sub-Saharan Africa for the poor? And it put that question out there, then it allowed anybody to bid for it from Africa and Europe, and there were joint projects, and in the end, there was maybe, I think, 150 different researchers in it from Africa and from Europe. There was loads of data collected. I think we reckon there was 100 person-years worth of data collected. There was nature papers from it. There was policy change from it. There was communities that grew together. It was a fantastic program. It was so good that the funders decided not to fund any more of it or do it again. So I would put money into that to try and spread it widely, but with a really well-defined problem like that, and then allow people to get together and try and address that question however they want to.
It's a great project. We saw some of the great things from UpGrow. Good answer. Bridget?
Well, Craig, you asked, what we could do that would be considered sexy and new and all that sort of thing. And I think all of the research that I've ever done has been pretty boring and applied. And I believe in applied research. Yeah. And we need, we're managing systems, more groundwater systems. So I would like to put more into basic applied research. Conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater. How can we manage floods and droughts? Storing managed aquifer recharge and understanding that, and linking groundwater to surface water to unsaturated zone. Because we're managing these systems more and more, we need to understand those connections. So it would be pretty boring plain research, but I think it's very important these days because we're trying to deal with floods and droughts in many different places. So,
yeah, good answers. Thanks, everyone. What I'm going to do is just quickly read out some of the comments that are coming into the chat room on Menti already. And most of these are comments. What research could be done to clarify why political leaders don't pursue sustainable groundwater development? We're going to come to a question on that in a little bit, actually. How do we communicate and cut through? There's also a comment here about the diversity of the panel. Good comment. Africa, the Middle East and South America, not represented? What impact does this have on the answers? Jared, do you have any thoughts? I'm putting people on the spot. Clearly will have an impact.
Yeah, I think, firstly, I'm from Africa, so there's someone here. But I think, yeah, it's definitely the perspectives that you need to bring together the group is often not seen in the conference where the medium is in English, right? And I think we need to be able to translate and tap into large regional conferences that are developing great, amazing science that's not published specifically in English first, but find a way for us to work together and translate this education between us. Because often we see it, especially when we're in Africa, that to bridge the gap between peoples, you really need to be in the same room. And this is something I think we can work on. Maybe as IAH as an association can work harder on this as well.
Okay. There's another interesting comment. Well, it's actually a bit of a question. How do we better transfer the research that's being done by the research community to applied situations? For example, consultancies. Saurabh, do you have a quick response to our questioner?
I have a long response to that, actually. So
feel free, we've got time.
And I was very sensitive. I believe that I'm the only consultant from academicians here, but I guess others are sensitive about it too. So what I did was I asked people around the office for their opinion about why research was not coming down from academicians to us. And the first thing I got was, research should be free to go where it may. Fundamental research may find its practical applications years later. So that's fine, and I love that. But that said, that's just the way it is constraints. That's one. It's cost efficiency and time effectiveness. Clients won't pay for things, and they need things on time. There is this is a good one. In the software world, new technology takes typically has to be 10 times better for it to be adopted. That's something I got there. And maybe PFAS is changing that because there is a lot of push for PFAS. The next one is us. Old consultants mentor the new graduates in their old ways. So, and I'm guilty of that, yes. Then the academic path after PhD or postdoc does not include industry experience. Then current academic research likes complexity. Then the second one is dissemination of information issues, and I think we are going to get to that as well. One is overselling. The other side is publish or perish floods the market with the same sort of topics. So there's too much to read, and it's just the same thing. There's nothing innovative a lot. Then timeliness of research is another one. And then publications are not actionable in industry. That's the other one. Then research directions is bubbles. So the research is not necessarily what is immediately of use in industry. And there are some examples. I'm not going to go through those. But funding preferences are applied versus fundamental research, and I don't think there's a lot of funding for applied research. Equipment access. A lot of research done in universities needs supercomputers, and consultants don't have supercomputer access all the time. Administrative constraints, cost and schedule, regulatory requirements. If I'm in a litigation case, it has to be Daubert proof, so it cannot be new research, and personal preferences. I think that's what I have for this.
Good, you've had a crack at answering a question we were going to come to, but that's excellent.
Great, could I?
Go for it, Jack.
It's not me, yeah.
I think
Your team.
This is probably also a two-way street, and I think because the consulting community, they're dealing with really practical problems, and sometimes the problems that require research are generated from industry, and this would be very profitable to the academics to have more interaction there. Here's an interesting problem, it needs to be solved. How do I research this?
Any other thoughts while we're on this topic?
Well, I think there's a spectrum between consulting. Consulting firms are oftentimes doing optimization research that may be ahead of what the researchers are doing. So, I mean, it's not one is, you know, so what we call it. So I think consultant firms are doing a lot of very interesting work. And so if we had more exchange between them, I think it would be good.
Yes, I think that's one of the things I got is we should stop fighting with each other because like we keep pointing fingers, you know, and we should work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna try and roll through. There's some really great questions on the chat board here. What do you think about the diffuse habit of publishing 3 papers during the PhD? As an editor of a journal, I receive more and more low-quality drafts rather than research papers. Bridget? Yeah.
I'm not the one to ask them that because I think there's just nobody is reading, and so that's why I started a podcast.
Nobody's reading. Nobody's reading.
And so I'm using a different medium to try to communicate. Still not having very much luck with that either. But so I think that we're in this do loop of publishing, and it's the journals, Wiley and all these other people that are pushing these things. So I think we need to step back. And when somebody asks me to write an evaluation of somebody, they say, what was impactful about their research, not the number. So we can count number of papers, and that's what we've been doing. But I think we need to look at impact more.
Agreed. Alan, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated one. I think there's a lot of merit if you're doing research to try and get it into a paper, because it's a different discipline than writing a thesis or writing a big report. Trying to find out what is it that's new in there, what is it that you can actually publish. I think there is merit in that. I'm a real fan of case study papers. It's not cool. It's really not cool. You've got to write your paper that says this is the first time this has ever been done. You get a bit fed up of that as an editor, don't you? It's another completely new thing. But I really like the other spectrum. A great case study that tells me something new about a bit of hydrogeology using different technique in an area I didn't know. I think our research values that. And these are the papers often that I'll really read and delve into because it tells me more about the hydrogeology. So I think there's this whole, you probably know the kind of pyramid of kind of research and research papers. The ones that give case studies that tell us new techniques or how an area works, I think are brilliant. And I think people trying to change papers to be something that they're not, I think there's a lot of students trying to do that, and I think they shouldn't be encouraged to do that. Just publish what you've actually got and what you've learned.
Well, I might also ask one of our early career researchers, Jared, are you feeling the pressure to publish at all costs? Publish or perish?
Yeah, I suppose it's a complicated question, right? But before I answer personally how I feel about publishing, I think the PhD process of getting papers to publication is such an important step in professional development that cannot be neglected, right? And we see this within the Early Careers Network and within our peers and colleagues, that getting to a point where you will have to publish something, you need to have this in your toolbox. You need to have the skill set. And the PhD is the perfect platform to do this in. You're in the think tank environment. You've got direct access to supervisors and researchers that have published great papers. So I think fundamentally it's important in the doctorate scale to find, as Bridget said, this research interest that's going to turn the science into a publication that's going to be accessible. I also think that the research community, maybe especially within the hydrogeologists, we all think we're data scientists, but we're not great at databasing. And I don't think we're good at making our papers findable to other researchers, to the industry, to the community. They kind of get lost in this big sea. And it's not that the technology or the know-how doesn't exist for us to find papers easily, to categorize them well, to make them searchable. And this translates down to the data that's within those papers. Because the greatest researchers now are the ones that can pick up all the papers that have been done in the past, put them all together, and create the picture of the research that's already been done in the place so that they can do the next step. But if it's not easy to find this data, to access this data, to curate it, compile it, and QA/QC it, and get it to the point that we're now doing research that's on top of research and not parallel to the research that's already been done, I think this is the step that the PhDs publishing need to then make this platform for everyone else to work on top of.
And there's a real problem there if students are submitting papers that are such low quality. I'd ask what the supervisors are doing in that situation.
And may I jump in?
Or not doing. Yeah, go for it,
I
Sora.
think also we need to cross-contaminate in the sense of, I think we sit in our own little bubbles, and I see that also if a student takes computer science classes and classes from other departments, he cannot get a civil engineering degree unless he has certain credits within civil engineering, you know. And such things should not be there. Such constraints should not be there. That's when we'll have more interesting papers. We'll have more research going on from different angles, bringing in things from different people.
Great. There's a few others here I'm going to try and fly through because I'd like to make sure all of the audience questions do get tackled. What does the panel think about the citation market? I think we all know what that is, colleagues. The citation market that we are witnessing with the main aim to increase the H factor rather than to produce high quality research. I'm going to ask you, Jack, what do you think?
Well, I hate to criticize university administrators. They can count, but they cannot read. This makes an easy decision. There's a number, and what does it mean? We don't know.
Thoughts?
High impact, we assume that the high impact papers are the highly cited ones, and that probably is true in general, but it's a game, and as Bridget says, that measures an impact of sorts, but what is the long-term impact in science? I do not know. Because we also have too many zombie papers. The research that has died and has come alive again and repeats itself over and over. And that counts in the H factors.
Yes, as opposed to Sleeping Beauties. Rui, any thoughts? H factors, citations?
Yeah, it's hard to say because I think all people are wondering how we evaluate the impact of the work. It is hard. You can't count for the numbers. You can't look at the citation markers. So how we should evaluate the work? I don't know. I don't have answers. But most people know. Account for the numbers of publications and see the citation markers. Do we have better ways to do that? I don't know.
Any other comments? Bridget, any thoughts?
So I think people should get a lot of credit for other ways of communicating. And at this conference, George Hooven shared his comic.
Ah, yes.
And he said he's got 50,000 downloads, or I can't recall. So I apologize for that. But we need to communicate in different ways and think about different things besides H factors. But it's easy for me to say because I'm almost done and dusted, you know. But but I really appreciate people do things like that. Are very and the groundwater project. We shouldn't forget that. I really admire John Cherry and what he's doing with the groundwater project, making the science accessible. The books that he publishes are much more readable and accessible to people at not a very high level required to get the concepts. So I think we should.
Absolutely. I'm going to keep flying. Time is flying. These are a few comments. There has certainly much to be done, more research, but we also have to convince politicians to protect groundwater and not to repeat the same mistakes that have led to the problems that we are now discussing. I think that is a big issue, isn't it? Convincing prime ministers and presidents and politicians and ministers is a big challenge, without a doubt. And I suspect on the whole, my observation is that as a community we have not done that well at all. But I'd be happy to have that debate. I think that we haven't cut through, and it's a massive challenge. What else have we got here? Innovation in groundwater research also lies in the application within an interdisciplinary context and its application to local context. Should this not get much more funding than it receives now? Probably, I would say. Anyone disagree? Anyone think less money? No. We all want more money, but it does come back to convincing government and also industry in the way we do research, I think. Much more partnered, less siloed, where we can do that. Game-changing research for groundwater. Invest the $10 million, US dollars it says, in proven low-cost options for groundwater recharge. There you go. What do you think of that one? 10 million into low-cost recharge, Bridget?
Well, I mean, we have been looking at the Colorado River Basin, and one of the things that I learned in looking at those data is that the groups continued to use groundwater and said it was much less expensive to use groundwater and to recharge it with the spreading basin, 10 times less expensive than using the Colorado River water directly in installing a water treatment plant. So, I mean, I think we should advertise some of those things. So, but you need to understand the system. You need to understand if that managed for recharge is hydrologically connected to where you are extracting the water. So there are lots of different things, but I think that's, you know, we have to manage the systems more and more to make it more sustainable. And I think conjunctive use and managed aquifer recharge are really good approaches.
As long as they work.
Right.
And I think that's it. I think sometimes there's a bit of hype about these things and say, yeah, we can do that and it will fix it. And actually a lot of the evidence isn't there if the system isn't right for aquifer recharge. So I think we need to be a little bit careful. We've done some research in southern India with partners there looking at check dams, and actually they didn't really work for regional recharge at all. They might locally, but all the claims about them completely changing the recharge across peninsular India weren't really founded. It was only really next to check dams. So yes, but if there's evidence, they work.
I have another comment here. Most jobs faced by groundwater consultants are effectively research projects. So much is unknown at every site. Research is not the sole prerogative of academics. Saurabh? Does that mean we're competing? What does that mean in practice from your perspective?
I agree. We do research all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, every site is different, every project is different. I think, again, we need to communicate more. We need to partner with academicians, which we do. Actually, we work in academia as well, and I think academicians should partner with industry as well. And I think that's something missing. And I think we discussed that was like, even in proposals, we don't put in academicians. Actually, we sometimes do. And academicians don't put in consultants into their proposals so that the research can be, you know, seamless, and we get ideas from y'all as well. So.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but in Australia, a shift towards industrial-led research where the industry partners have to drive the agenda in government granting schemes, and indeed perhaps even lead the proposal. So there's some of these things. Bridget, are you seeing?
But I mean, I think if we had, like the oil industry has internships for students that they could spend the summer and so they can learn. And I think if consulting firms had things like that and rotations with undergraduates and internships, I think that would be a great way to bring them together.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking about that too. In summer, how many interns do we get? There are certain professors who send their students as interns, and certain ones don't. They'd rather have one more paper published than come and work with us.
So on that, and that was all of the questions and comments so far, I'll check them again in a moment. We're sort of touching on that research and practice area, and there's been some assertion, I've certainly heard in conversations, that the research practice gap is growing, not closing, and that research is occurring at a rate that's far greater than the application of even existing research methodologies and findings. Do you agree with that assertion, that it's growing or closing? Perhaps I'll go back to you, Saurabh.
Yes, it is growing. The gap is growing, and I think, again, we need to start communicating with each other. That's the main thing. Get internships, put each other in proposals. I have some tips here, actually. Communicate better. I think we have our big problem is communication. We talk about politicians not listening to us, but that's because they don't want to read math papers, you know. They'd rather read something actionable, something scaring them into doing something about it, you know. So maybe just have some authors of horror stories come and join us and, publish with us.
Good. Any thoughts on this side of the panel? Jack, any thoughts?
Well, the politicians tend to respond to scares or things. So we hydrogeologists, we have to be ready when the next major drought comes in. People say, what do we do? We should have the plans ready. Say, here's how you can address this. And then maybe there will be a response.
Rui, any thoughts?
It's hard to see if the gap growing or not, but what is certain is always a gap for a long time. Actually, in China, we have a lot of internship of the undergraduate, graduate to work in the industries or consultant. Many students are involved in it, but as I agree with you that the more publications going on and the complicated modeling and the approaches, but the less of them are using in the field side. How to improve the gap between them? I think the training is very important. It's training on-site and training, remotely training via website or the learning material. And another important issue is maybe we should have more work together between the academics from universities and from industry. Maybe we need to put more information and work together.
Bridget, any thoughts on the research practice gap?
Well, I mean, I would like to say, oftentimes in our research scientists, we focus on the problems, and we're all in deep doo-doo and everything, but the engineers have the solutions, and so I think we need to, and Saurav was saying actionable items, so I think we need to bridge that gap, between just describing all these issues that we have and how depressing it is sometimes, and let's have some solutions, propose some solutions and work more with engineers, in bridging that gap.
And like you said, we should have internships from academia. We should put in technology transfer into our proposals, right? So we do all this work and there's no technology transfer as part of the proposal itself. So that is why there's no technology transfer. If there's money in that, I think it will happen more.
And Alan?
Yeah, I think sometimes our funding isn't set up the way it should be as well for research, because it has to be novel. It's got to be the very, very, very novel thing. And that's what gets funded, rather something that might actually be useful. So I think the funding bodies, I need to recognize that more, that it's not all about novelty, it can be about usefulness and impact as well. And I think we need, across the board, we need curious people. And we need to realize that technology transfer takes time, and it also takes people with that expertise. Sometimes the people doing the research aren't the best to then get it in a technical ready perspective to be used in industry. So we've got to recognize our limitations as well and get the right people involved to help doing that.
That's right. So different parts of the life cycle need perhaps different people.
I would like to comment on Alan's your comment on case histories is correct, and I was an officer in a major funding agency, and he said, we do not fund case histories. But those case histories sometimes identify the real problems for which the blue sky research is needed and is going to be applied. So I agree.
I'm going to, colleagues, we've got just over 10 minutes. I want to switch gears just slightly here. On Tuesday, we had an education plenary panel, and now we're having a research panel. These two areas are not mutually exclusive and decoupled entities, and I would argue they're entirely interrelated. We've already heard Rui talk about training. What role does training and education have in enhancing the research practice, I'll call it policy nexus? The role of education and training. Jared, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an important point, right? And thinking about how to translate the science that we're developing within this community, there seems to be something broken in the loop, right? And I have to think back to when I first started my postgraduate research, we had issues with funding coming down through our national channels, right? Because the government was not investing in the things that I was interested in studying, but I felt that there was something impactful that needed to be done, and the city of Cape Town was in a great drought at the time. And so we moved our attention to the public sector and the public themselves and crowdfunded the research because they also felt like there was research that needed to be done. So we broke the normal cycle of scientists translating their research to the government, who then funded into the industry. We kind of turned it around, and scientists went to the people, who then created a popular opinion, which then stirred the government into investing, and now it's trickled down through our private sector as well. And I think that stranded asset that the private sector has to research is something that really needs to be engaged with. And in South Africa, we do this a lot. We send our students into the private sector. They curate and create data within consulting projects and bring it back into the research space. And I hope, I only see it from one side, but I really hope the consultants in South Africa also look to us to say these innovative methods are benefiting us, and creating that education crossing that education boundary has been super effective in South Africa. And I think it's a lesson that we can learn from, right? And it was all kind of stirred up by this broken communication loop with the ministry.
Did Day Zero have an impact
on
everyone, on focusing the mind?
Yes, of course. I think it was topical at the time, and there was an element of fear mongering that stirred people into really acknowledging how valuable our water resources were. You thought twice when you turned the tap on. And when this happens ubiquitously across 4.5 million people in the space of 3 months, there's a shift that really has stimulated our hydrological research sector as well as the private sector looking at water.
Right, important points. Bridget, any thoughts on education and training when it comes to research?
Well, I'm for a very open system, and however we can educate people, 1-year masters, online material, all sorts of ways, because we need to get the information out there and get to train them any way we can. And so and then, we've talked a lot about working with industry and internships, but also working with government agencies and interacting with regulators and helping them, because it's very difficult for them sometimes to figure out the level of regulation. So I think open, all sorts of ways of communicating, putting the information out there and getting at the people when they're young through things like this, So getting them interested, talking to the kids, and the kids talk to the parents and the teachers, all of these things. I think we need to have a very open way of educating.
Any thoughts? I know, Saurabh, you do have some thoughts on this topic. We've discussed them.
All right. But I agree with you, Bridget. We need to be serious about this, So there are funds where you have workforce development, as part of your funding. But what do we do for workforce development? We say, we've hired 2 more PhD students, so they are going to be workforce development. And like I said, all you're doing is developing more mini-me's in academia and not really workforce, which is out here, in consulting. And I think that is where there is a gap. And it may be administrative. That's what I feel, We are stuck in this administrative, the way they are administrating us, the way we, work in research, in academia, and it's limiting. There is no free flow across governments, industry, academia, non-NGOs. That's what I feel.
Good. And Camille, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think it's indeed difficult to try to transfer our knowledge to politics and feel that what we are doing is actually useful at that level. But I think also it comes from the fact that we need to maybe learn how to do it and be better in, I heard yesterday, for instance, that it's much easier to read a map than to read our plots. And I mean, well, of course, if you're not from the academia, there's plenty ways of understanding things differently than what we do. And most of the time, we don't really know how to make our research more transferable. And I think it's important because it's not only about educating people that are at university. It's not only about training, it's also all these people that are out there that are already managing resources, that are stakeholders. How can we empower them now and give them, I don't know, open source, easy modeling platforms so that they can by themselves try to run a model and have results and see, well, now if I'm using some prediction from climate, what happens to my own sites where I don't necessarily need an academician to make a study, but that I can myself have, I don't know, some idea of what's happening on my site. So I think there is also like room for transferring our knowledge and giving the others tools that they can use in an easy way. And I'm also thinking that if we look at other sciences, such as ocean sciences or climate sciences, I have the feeling that they did a good job in the community, at the community level altogether, and I think they have a clear message on the fact that on temperature of the ocean or air temperature, and sometimes I have the feeling that maybe our message is a little bit less clear, and that as a community maybe we can work bit more together to have a very clear message to go to the policymakers, and so that it's easier then for them to make decisions.
I think that that's an extremely important point, and it segues into the next topic I wanted to touch on. A number of the questions that have come up in the chat room are like, how do we convince the politicians? Are we just in an echo chamber here? Everyone here is interested in groundwater, loves groundwater, is curious about groundwater, but it is almost certainly the case that the president of the country, the prime ministers, are not thinking about groundwater. How do we cut through if we are to have an impact? We're all saying we need more money, we need more political attention. How do we cut through? Short and sharp answers. We're on the last few minutes, colleagues. Cut through, Saurabh.
Communication. That's the main thing, I think. We are communicating only to each other and not to the outside audience.
So you agree it's an echo chamber? Yes. All right, Alan?
We need to be brave with our communication. We need to be able to go to media. I don't know how many newspaper articles have been written this week, but we need to do that this week, be brave with our communication. We need to step into the shoes of our policymakers as well. We need to understand what it is that drives them, what it is that they're worried about, and then see how we can help them solve that from a groundwater perspective. Half the world use groundwater for drinking water. Our policymakers need to know that so that they can help fund and protect groundwater for these people. So brave and step in their shoes.
Any other ideas? Okay, I won't ask every panelist, but any burning response to the cutting through to the president or ministers? Yeah.
Well, I think.
Yep. Jared, then Jack.
Yeah, it's really short, but it's effective, targeted translational deliverables and collaboration with intergovernmental organizations.
Great. And obviously a role for groups like IAH amongst some of these things, isn't there? Jack, final word on cutting through.
There was a very excellent presentation talking about how to communicate to stakeholders. And typically we have not done that well. But there's new ways of getting the message on groundwater projects, how they relate to the general public and to the politicians. And I think we've not been very good at that as hydrogeologists.
Great. On the last couple minutes, colleagues, and this is my final question, what is the one key takeaway message? We've had a lot of discussion, but just one message you want our audience and our community to take away from today's session. Rui, one message.
One message. We are in a changing world, and from older generation, our generation to next generation. If one key message is to always be aware of the changing nature of groundwater in a changing world and in our lives. Okay.
Great, thank you, Rui. Jack.
One of the things that came out is we're not producing enough hydrogeologists to meet the demand.
Yeah.
And that's something we need to remedy.
It's a massive issue, isn't it? Camille, final word.
Yeah, I think there are great challenges, so it's very exciting, but at the same time, I think indeed we have quite a responsibility now to mitigate all the pressure on groundwater, and yeah, so that needs the more communication, education, and of course good research.
Lots to do. Jared?
Yeah, I think it's enabling and engaging the human resource, right? Go local. We need to identify our stakeholders before the project initiates and abstract that information from them. Get diffusive ancestral indigenous knowledge from the peoples that we work with, and then translate that up into the science that we're ground up as we move forward to innovate.
Great. Bridget?
I guess thinking about what we were talking about earlier, crowdsourcing data and getting the communities involved in collecting the data would help them understand the dynamics of the system, and so I think that would help them manage it better. So I think that would be one thing.
Great. Thank you. And Alan?
Oh, it's really hard with one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would say, don't get lost in the detail. Let's not lose the sight of the wood for the trees with so many techniques. Hydrogeology actually is really simple at essence. How much groundwater is there? What's the quality? How does it change when you pump it? How is it connected to rivers and recharge? And how will a changing climate and abstraction affect groundwater? It's quite simple. Make sure all the techniques and everything we're doing can help us answer these questions to bring sustainable water supply for those who most need it. So maybe that's one point. Almost.
Great. And it is 9:30 on the dot, so very quick final word.
Sure. I was going to say exactly that. You know, it's simple. Let's not forget our fundamentals. But at the same time, I think the future of hydrogeology is bright. There's so much happening in so many different fields that we need to excite our younger people to come into the fold.
Absolutely.
And something like that book there, you know.
Yeah, and we've even got children's books, we've got nursery rhymes, there's some really interesting stuff on YouTube. Colleagues, that wraps it up for us. I think that you've heard quite an interesting set of views. I think that it's fair to say that this panel certainly thinks that the future of hydrogeology is still strong. I think also that there's a sense emerging, though, that it's changing, and for good reason. It shouldn't be the same as it was 50 years ago. We've heard about interdisciplinary approaches, data integration, advanced modelling, sustainable management, and also the role of human beings. The critical skill shortages that we're seeing in various continents and countries around the world. And I think that there is a role now more than ever for hydrogeologists to communicate bravely, ever so important in a world with fake news, post-truths, misinformation, disinformation, and a role there also for IAH. So thank you for coming along, and thank you to our panel. Well done.